Okay, welcome to another chapter of Have Camera Will Travel. So, I've been on this sort of route talking about going to Somalia and then building a music festival, and now I'm back home. Well, everything seemed like a massive blur because I traveled all over the place for work. I went to Pakistan, Somalia, and I started covering different war zones, heading over to Kenya and heading over into South Africa and South Sudan to cover there. Constantly was working. I come back to Afghanistan, and yeah, I was covering the news more often than not. And it just seemed to be the most progressive sort of way. But this episode is actually dedicated to my friend Z, my brother from another mother. And he was this young Afghan kid. Now, he used to basically carry bullets for the Mujahideen when they were fighting against the Russians, and when he was a wee little boy. And then, well, actually, no, that's not true. He wasn't doing that. He was with the Mujahideen during the Civil War as a young kid. He'd known war and conflict most of his life. And, when the Taliban had taken over power, he'd been working with their struggle as well, against their struggle as well. And, and then the Taliban had gone and he was eager to work. He loved English and he loved cricket. These were the two things that he loved most. And he first became my fixer when we were doing a TV series called The Extreme Tourists. I talked about that. That was this travel show. And Z took us to Tora Bora, to where Osama bin Laden lived. And he was this kid that loved life. He had this sort of saying, is like, everything is possible. Anyway, he loved cricket, I'll tell you that. So, one of the things is, he was an interpreter for the US Special Forces. He also was an interpreter for the Australian Forces. Unfortunately, one of the problems was, when I discovered when I was in India, was that he had worked for a private company as a translator for the Australian Special Forces. So legally, unfortunately, he didn't have any rights to be able to sort of claim to be able to come to Australia. And that was a really hard one because we had letters and stuff from Australian soldiers, confirming who Z was. So at one particular time, I was having problems with my visa. It was mainly because my film company didn't pay its taxes at one particular time because my friend Sam French, my business partner, decided to leave. So he left, and we didn't pay our taxes. So the Afghan government was deciding to sort of punish me and not allow me to easily come back to Afghanistan and just get a 1 year visa. And so I was actually stuck in India, but it was a good particular moment for me because Z had contacted me saying that the Taliban had threatened him. They actually had killed his uncle and cut off his head and threw it over his barricaded wall into his front yard. Must be the most shocking shit to ever see, ever, as a young guy. But he wanted out, and even though we had did this work with the Americans, he really loved Australia and he really wanted to come, just for the sake that this was a country that loved cricket. He grew up in the streets of Jalalabad and playing cricket, and he knew everything about the game. He was always asking me about it. And sometimes if I went back to Australia and stuff, I'd bring him back some cricket stuff. It'd be sometimes a while between seeing each other. and he helped me when I was making an ad for Roshan Communications, and we were shooting in Jalalabad. And that one particular time, I actually had to. It was a big telecommunication project, and I had to pay for everything in cash. And so at one particular time, I had to take out probably about $150,000 from the Afghan International Bank from our company, and ride home with this money and store it somehow. But yeah, I rode home on my motorbike, basically with my whole jacket covered with money, um, and yeah, it was crazy. I should have probably got an armored car, but I didn't. I figured I'd find everybody. Uh, but yeah, getting back to it, Z. So Z came with me and hung out with me in India. We went like every single day to the Australian embassy, and we tried to process him, and it was this massive struggle. Because we would hand in all these different paperwork, or they'd ask us for more and more paperwork, and I was at least his buffer to be able to get him into the embassy to sort of plea his case, and I did it because I love him so much. Yeah, he is my brother from another mother, and they kept rejecting it. And at the end of the day, they just finally found his term work papers, and they just showed it to me. And it's like, he doesn't work for the Australian government, so we can't process him as a. And it was a real fucking blow. And he just wanted to come back to Afghanistan, and lo and behold, we fix all my stuff with the embassy, and yeah, so I get a visa back to Afghanistan just for like a short 1 month visit, and I end up having to hit up it was the Ministry of their tax department. It was at the Ministry of Finance, and then to the tax and revenue. And I sent in all my tax report things, and I was with him. I was also with another guy, Gulistan, and I finally got in to see it in person instead of getting anyone, and then like getting through and getting to like one of the main sort of like desks. And they're looking at my paperwork, and they go, "Oh, your name, you're Yaqub. Are you Muslim?" And I go, "Yeah, man. I'm born in a Muslim family." And it's like, "Oh, yeah." They sort of like they question me. They ask me if I can recite Quran, and I do. And they go, "Okay, well, I think it was $40,000," and they just cross off one of the zeros. It goes, "You only owe $4,000 in tax if you want to stay here." And I was like, you know what? I could do that. So I paid the taxes and managed to be able to stay in the country for another year or so. But yeah, I would have been able to lose all of my shit and not be able to come back. But yeah, anyway, where was I? Many, many tangents. This life is a fucking whirlwind when you live in Afghanistan. And, you constantly keep on traveling. And Z was doing translating for American sort of PSYOPs operation out in Jalalabad. And I went to go visit there, and those guys, they were mainly veterans and people who worked in the Afghan government, working in the Afghan government to help and try to support like kids with dreams and stuff. They were also supported by the San Diego Rotary Club, and so they were getting donations coming in for building projects. So there's one project that Z called the Schools of the Moon, and now the Schools of the Moon were the schools that were out in the middle of nowhere, basically on the border between Afghanistan and Pakistan. There was no actual physical school. All the kids would come from their villages and come to this open, bare land. And I went there during the time that we were doing our doco, well, no, not doco, at the Roshan commercial. And at the end of it, we went and visit this thing that he believed in. We donated some money, but I could see the real thing that Z wanted to do, and he wanted to build schools, actual physical schools. So the Rotary Club of San Diego, I took all these photos, and I also went to the US and stuff and showed these photos and talked about this idea of building schools on the moon. And, we got a good donation of money, about 40,000 USD. I sold my photos and we raised all this money and we built these schools. They were just tents at the time. So we went into all of the black markets sort of thing. We bought refugee tents that were probably supplied by UNICEF or UNDP, and we were able to have these big, nice open structures. We bought all these tents and we delivered it to 15 schools, remote schools that had nothing. And, it's something to cover them up from the elements. And it was an amazing feeling to be able to do this, to actually build a safe place for kids. And I went there several times with Z. Sometimes he would get concerned about the security and safety of me, because if the Taliban did catch me, they would probably harm me or kidnap me. But I kept on doing these projects. And one particular time, I was in an armored vehicle, and the Taliban are actually set an IED, and it blew up underneath our vehicle, and we went flying. I must have spun in the air. I fell like twice before we hit the side wall or some mud brick wall of somebody's house. And I just remember my whole shoulder breaking and just the cracks and stuff. And this is the mobility of my arm at this, unless I really force myself into some sort of pain to get it to sit properly. But we got out. In the back of the armored vehicle we had guns, and everyone, the villagers and stuff, all helped us, and we all got into this sort of safe position. And we called up for a rescue team, so a quick reaction force came within 15 minutes by helicopter to come pick us up. For some reason, obviously, the Taliban didn't come get us or attack. I think they just obviously set off the IED and just waited to see if we were people that of interest. And we, lucky enough, probably weren't. But the Americans came in helicopters and took us back to base. Z was a particular character. I fucking love him. He helped me out so much. He was into security. We did our stint. He did get arrested for when his boss ran away, and they accused him of siding with the Taliban on a particular kidnapping. And I didn't see him for a while. He was in some sort of fucking black site in Afghanistan. I got to actually see him after a few months of just keep on questioning. I think I had to do some sort of favor for the Ministry of Interior, or give them some photos of the Afghan police doing their jobs and stuff, and that gave me some sort of favor. And they end up releasing him. But he was this young kid who loved life, loved cricket. His end days and stuff was building cricket ovals in Afghanistan. And he built over 20, 30 cricket ovals. And then somebody killed him at an opening of a cricket oval being opened. They planted a bomb on the podium, and it blew up when he came up on stage to come and open it. And I blamed the Taliban for a very long time. I fucking hated them. And it was probably only until the Taliban came in power that I actually got to speak to somebody who could actually tell me the real story. And it was some corrupt official who hated Z and what he could do, and wanted to punish him. He managed to be an ear for the Americans. He managed to be part of the government. The governor, Gulgar Sherzai, loved him. He was able to make things happen, and he got punished for that. But yeah, I always wanted to know the truth, and it really hurt because I was so away from Afghanistan at that particular time when he was killed. And I was covering Syria and the war and the conflict there, and it was really hard to just come back to Afghanistan and find more. But I spoke to him whenever I could. And, he found somebody finally. He was always in love with, some of the foreign girls, the expats that come and live there, because he spoke English and, he had these clear ideas and, passions. And it was, he had married, he had a child, and I only managed to hear a little bit more about him when the Taliban had taken over. I'd come back to Afghanistan and was working on my photo book. But yeah, that was Z, and Z was my brother from another mother. And that's it for me. I'll work on the next episode. So it's probably going to be more Afghanistan, because Afghanistan was a place that I spent so much of my time. But we'll talk about rock and roll music and eventually getting out of Afghanistan.